The June 9, 2016 Trump Tower meeting. In addition to business and personal correspondence, the Agalarovs were involved in pushing for a meeting which occurred on June 9, 2016 in Trump Tower. Quote, June 9, 2016 meeting, close quote, close paren. The committee sought to understand the meeting, which involved Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, a Russian lawyer named Natalia Veselnitskaya, and 4 of her associates. The committee's efforts focused on the motivations for the meeting on both sides, the content of the meeting itself, and communications involving the participants following the meeting. The committee interviewed each of the attendees at the meeting, as well as several other individuals who had non-public awareness of the meeting or communications related to it. Nevertheless, the committee faced significant limitations in its efforts to fully understand the June 9, 2016 meeting. In particular, the almost complete absence of documentary evidence regarding the content of the meeting itself forced the committee to rely heavily on witness testimony. That testimony, while helpful, was often incomplete from an interested party or contradictory to other testimony or documents. Witnesses were not in agreement on basic facts such as what language was being spoken and who was in the room during the meeting. In some cases, testimony was not consistent across multiple interviews with the same individual. The committee was unable to reconcile some of these challenges and discrepancies. Background on the information provided in the meeting. The June 9, 2016 meeting with members of the Trump campaign was part of a larger Russian government-supported effort to counter U.S. sanctions. The committee assesses that some of the information and themes presented by the Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, in the meeting, and again following the election via email, had been used previously in an influence effort targeting individuals perceived to be sympathetic to Russia's position. That previous influence effort occurred in Moscow in April 2016, months prior to the June 9, 2016 meeting, when then-Congressman Dana Rohrabacher was provided a folder of information from the Russian government that was largely similar in content to what Veselnitskaya later used in Trump Tower. Information provided to Rohrabacher in April 2016. In April 2016, Rohrabacher, along with several other members of the House of Representatives and their staff, traveled to Europe, including Russia. While in Moscow, Rohrabacher and his staffer, Paul Behrens, separated from the group and, despite the concerns of the U.S. Embassy, met with Vladimir Yakunin. Yakunin is a close confidant of President Putin. Yakunin is also the former president of Russian Railways and the president of the Dialogue of Civilizations, DOC, a Berlin-based non-governmental organization. At the time of the meeting, Yakunin was sanctioned by the United States. The committee found that Yakunin is significantly involved in Russian influence activities, including those targeting elections. 2 pages redacted. Rohrabacher told the committee that he was unsure how the April 2016 Moscow meeting with Yakunin was arranged, but said that it may have been proposed by then-Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. According to Rohrabacher, at the meeting, Yakunin spoke about the DOC and was interested in securing Rohrabacher's participation in the DOC's annual Rhodes Forum. Rohrabacher told the committee he was unable to attend. At the meeting, Yakunin also raised a report that had information he believed Rohrabacher should review. Rohrabacher recalled, quote, Yakunin said, "Look, our prosecutors have done an investigation into this Magnitsky thing, and were you willing to look at the material, their report?" And I said, "Sure, I'll look at any report. I'll talk to anybody and I'll read anything." And he said, "Well, they'll try to get it to you at that meeting you're going to have tomorrow with the Duma Foreign Affairs Committee." Close quote. Following the meeting with Yakunin, Rohrabacher, Behrens, and the other members of the delegation met with Konstantin Kosachev, the chairman of the Council of the Federation Committee on Foreign Affairs. The committee found that Kosachev is significantly involved in Russian influence activities, including those targeting the United States. He was sanctioned by the United States in 2018. 2 pages redacted. At the end of the meeting with Kosachev passed Rohrabacher a note. On the note, Kosachev had written a question asking whether Rohrabacher would be willing to receive, quote, sensitive documents, close quote. After responding that he would be willing, Rohrabacher was approached by several individuals who handed him a folder of documents. Behrens recalled, quote, Mr. Rohrabacher's in the middle, across the table from Mr. Kosachev, and the meeting's winding down. Mr. Kosachev hands Mr. Rohrabacher a note on a piece of paper and says, would you be willing to accept sensitive documents? What I remember is the note said that, would you be willing to accept these documents? And Mr. Rohrabacher looked at me and showed me the note. And I said, okay, sure. So Mr. Rohrabacher said, okay. And then the meeting kind of ended, and it was a little awkward. And these two people who we didn't know who they were came up, and there was like an introduction. But I didn't know who they were. Even if they introduced us by name, I had no context of who these people were. They were not in the meeting. They somehow got there as if it was prearranged on their side. And these people gave Mr. Rohrabacher the folder, and he said, thank you very much, we'll take a look at it. If we shook hands, I don't remember. We may have shook hands. All of it took maybe a minute, and then we walked out. But it was a little unusual. Close quote. Rohrabacher told the committee that he recalled that the two men who provided the documents were from the Russian prosecutor's office, but otherwise could not identify them. The committee obtained a copy of the documents that Kosachev and his associates provided to Rohrabacher in April 2016. The primary document focuses on a series of allegations related to U.S. Magnitsky Act sanctions legislation. The document provided to the congressional delegation following the Kosachev meeting is shorter than the document that Natalia Veselnitskaya later used at the June 9, 2016 meeting and is not the same document. However, the organization and substance of the two documents are similar, and parts of the two documents are nearly or completely identical. Natalia Veselnitskaya's connections to Russian influence operations. Natalia Veselnitskaya is a Russian lawyer who previously worked for and remains in contact with senior individuals in the Russian government. Veselnitskaya has described herself as a source of information or, quote, informant, close quote, for the Russian government, and as a private attorney. The committee assesses that Veselnitskaya has previously been involved in redacted. Veselnitskaya has traveled frequently to the United States, in part due to her role representing the Russian businessman Denis Katsev and his Cyprus-based company Previzon Holdings. In 2013, the U.S. government alleged that Previzon Holdings was involved in laundering the proceeds of a $230 million Russian tax fraud scheme that involved corrupt Russian officials. Veselnitskaya helped represent Previzon in the case. Redacted. On April 30, 2017, upon arrival from Moscow to New York's JFK Airport, Veselnitskaya disclosed that she was traveling with $20,000 in cash. Redacted. Veselnitskaya was also one of the leading Russian nationals in the lobbying effort against the Magnitsky Act and its sanctions in the United States. 2 paragraphs redacted. In her efforts, Veselnitskaya has had wealthy and powerful Russian supporters. For example, in early 2016, Vasily Anisimov, a Russian oligarch with ties to Vladimir Putin and ties to organized crime, sought to hire Louis Freeh, an American lobbyist and former director of the FBI, to work with Veselnitskaya on the Previzon case. The connection between Freeh and Anisimov was facilitated by Emre Pak, who also has ties to Russian organized crime. 2 paragraphs redacted. Freeh is believed to have held multiple meetings in Moscow, likely in 2016, at least one of which included senior Russian government officials, and at least one of which included Veselnitskaya. Strategies regarding the Previzon case and countering the Magnitsky Act were discussed at both meetings. An initial meeting in Moscow was attended by Louis Freeh, then Russian Prosecutor General Yuri Chaika, the Russian Deputy Prosecutor General Peter Kotzev, Emery Pak, and the associate managing director at Freeh's firm. Source redacted. Quote, "Two topics were discussed in the meeting. Foremost was the need to resolve the Prevazon litigation. Secondly, the Russian officials stated that the group needed to start figuring out a solution to the Magnitsky Act. At the meeting, either Chaika or the deputy prosecutor general said Freeh should discuss follow-up details with Natalia Veselnitskaya. They added that Freeh should do this because she's one of us, or she's part of us, implying she was working for the Russian government. Freeh and the identified associate managing director did have a follow-up meeting with Veselnitskaya regarding both the Prevazon case and the Magnitsky Act on an undisclosed date, and then the two returned to the United States." Close quote. Among her other efforts, Veselnitskaya helped establish an organization called the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation, HRAGI. The Delaware-based foundation served in part as a platform for the influence campaign against the Magnitsky Act and related sanctions under the auspices of addressing a retaliatory adoption policy that was put in place by Russia. Veselnitskaya was involved in the production and promotion of a film that targeted the Magnitsky Act and sought to exonerate the Russian government officials who perpetrated the $230 million fraud. The film played in Washington, D.C. on June 13, 2016. In her efforts, Veselnitskaya significantly interacted with at least one member of Congress, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, both in Washington and in Moscow. Veselnitskaya also at various points worked with Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS and worked alongside numerous firms related to the Prevazon case and related matters, including Baker Hostetler, Quinn Emanuel Urahart and Sullivan, and Cozen O'Connor. In addition to its work on the Magnitsky Act and adoptions, Veselnitskaya's HRAGI was intended to have a broader mission to conduct cultural exchanges to improve Russia's image in the United States. Such exchanges, while not inherently problematic, have been used by Russian NGOs to facilitate influence operations and recruitment by Russian intelligence services. Although HRAGI signed a contract for services related to conducting cultural exchanges, that effort never came to fruition, and the organization ultimately ceased operations. Veselnitskaya's work to counter sanctions legislation in the United States did not take place in isolation. The committee found that she has significant and concerning connections to Russian government and intelligence officials and has not been forthcoming about those relationships. Redacted. 4 pages redacted. Veselnitskaya told the committee that she established Camerton Consulting, a law firm, in 2003. According to a press report, Veselnitskaya and Camerton represented the FSB between 2005 and 2013 in a real estate dispute. Veselnitskaya also told the committee that she represents Aras Agalarov on some issues and has worked for him since 2013 or 2014. According to Kavaladze, quote, Ms. Veselnitskaya represents Crocus in numerous real estate-related, land-related transactions, close quote. Both Agalarov and Veselnitskaya are connected to Peter Kotzev. Redacted. Separately, Agalarov and Veselnitskaya both have close ties to Yuri Chaika, who until 2020 was Russia's prosecutor general. While Chaika was in that role, Veselnitskaya told the committee that she was in contact with the prosecutor general's office and would personally brief Chaika. Chaika was a member of President Putin's Security Council, and Russian press reports have characterized him as part of the security establishment at high level, along with Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev and head of the SFB, Alexander Bortnikov. Chaika likely has been involved in Russian influence activities, and his son is sanctioned by the United States. 3 paragraphs redacted. On January 8, 2019, the U.S. Department of Justice charged Veselnitskaya with obstruction of justice related to the Prevazon case. Rinat Akhmetshin. Rinat Akhmetshin is a Russian-American lobbyist who has worked on a number of foreign lobbying efforts, some of which were undertaken with Veselnitskaya. Akhmetshin first worked with Veselnitskaya on issues related to the Prevozon case. Akhmetshin also worked with Veselnitskaya through HRAGI, which was described previously, and on HRAGI's efforts related to countering the Magnitsky Act. Akhmetshin told the committee that after doing research on Browder related to depositions in the Prevozon case, he had the idea to establish HRAGI and proposed it to Veselnitskaya and her client in Russia, Katsev. Akhmetshin said he didn't know who the financial backers of HRAGI were, but believed that Katsev was one of the smaller contributors. In testimony to the committee, Akhmetshin sought to downplay the extent and nature of his work for HRAGI. The committee assesses that Akhmetshin has connections to the Russian government, a Russian oligarch with ties to Putin, and to Russian intelligence. In several cases, these ties were more extensive than what has previously been publicly known. The committee found that Akhmetshin was not fully forthcoming in his testimony. Redacted several paragraphs. Akhmetshin has a history of allegations against him regarding hacking and the dumping of stolen information as part of influence operations. Redacted several paragraphs. However, Akhmetshin testified to the committee that he had never met Manafort in person prior to the June 9, 2016 meeting at Trump Tower, but he had known of Manafort due to Manafort's work in Ukraine and their mutual relationship with Lanny Wiles. Two redacted paragraphs. Akhmetshin has been friends for 15 or 20 years with Sam Patton. Patton, in 2018, pleaded guilty to being an unregistered foreign agent. Patton was a close business associate of Konstantin Kilimnik, a Russian intelligence officer. Patton testified to the committee that Akhmetshin and Kilimnik have met without Patton present, possibly more than once. The nature of the meeting or meetings between Akhmetshin and Kilimnik, according to Patton, related to then Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych visiting New York. Akhmetshin told the committee that he has known Simpson for many years and that they have had mutual clients like Prevozon, but they have never worked together. Anatoly Samochornov. Anatoly Samochornov is an interpreter. He was born in Russia in 1968 and came to the United States in 1991. He testified to the committee that he has been interpreting professionally since roughly 1997 and has worked as a subcontractor for the Department of State, both as a program manager related to the International Visitor Leadership Program and as an interpreter. Samochornov testified to the committee that he has never worked for the FBI. Samochornov has done some contract work for the United Nations, UN agencies, like UNAIDS and UN Women, but has never worked formally for the UN itself. Samochornov first met Natalia Veselnitskaya and Denis Katsev in the fall of 2015, when Samochornov was asked to fill in for a colleague to do deposition work related to the Prevozon case. In that capacity, Samochornov was interpreting for Baker Hostetler and Quinn Emanuel Urquhart and Sullivan, two law firms that were hired by the defendants. Following his work on the Prevozon case, Samochornov was approached by Veselnitskaya and Baker Hostetler to continue doing interpreting work for HRAGI, and he accepted. Origins and foreknowledge of the June 9, 2016 meeting. The effort to plan the June 9, 2016 meeting in Trump Tower likely began on June 3, 2016, and consisted of a phone call from Emin Agalarov to Rob Goldstone. Goldstone testified to the committee, quote, "On the morning of, I believe it was June 3, 2016, Emin called me and asked if I could possibly contact the Trumps," was how he called them, because his father had met with a well-connected government lawyer in his office who had some interesting information about illicit Russian funding to the Democrats and its candidate, and could I pass that on and get the meeting? I asked him what he was talking about. First of all, I said, "Could you articulate what does that mean? Who is this person?" And he says, "It doesn't matter. All you need to do is get the meeting. Ike Kavaladze will coordinate it. You don't have to attend, and you don't have to report back on it to me. You just have to get a meeting. And I simply asked if he could possibly articulate what it was that I was supposed to be conveying. And he said again that she was very well connected and she had some potentially damaging information. I'm not even sure that he said she at that point. He just said a Russian lawyer. I again asked, who is this person? And he said, well connected. Again, I can be quite flip. I said, well connected to what? The power grid? She must be connected to something. And he said, connected. And that was it. I pushed a few times on that, and that was my final answer. The lawyer was well connected. I then said, you know, this isn't your field of expertise. It isn't my field of expertise, and I'm not comfortable. I don't know what you're asking me to convey. They're going to ask me. And he said again, there's information. It's potentially damaging to the Democrats and Hillary, and I think you should contact the Trumps. My dad would really like this meeting to take place. My final statement on that, I just said to him, I really don't want to do this. I know nothing about politics. You don't, and your father certainly doesn't. And he goes, please, just ask for the meeting. You don't need to do anything else. Close quote. Kavaladze, who learned about the planned meeting shortly after Emin Agalarov tasked Goldstone, told the committee that the meeting was Aras Agalarov's, quote, initiative and project, close quote, and that Aras Agalarov was, quote, directly and personally involved, close quote. Kavaladze believed that Aras Agalarov was doing a, quote, favor, close quote, for, quote, someone, close quote, by organizing the meeting. However, Kavaladze noted that, quote, whoever contacted Mr. Agalarov Sr., I don't know, close quote. Kavaladze explained that Emin Agalarov was only involved because Aras Agalarov would not contact Goldstone directly, but it would instead pass the message through Emin Agalarov. Emin Agalarov told the committee that he did not know why or for whom his father wanted the Trump Tower meeting with Veselnitskaya to be set up because Emin Agalarov had not asked. Emin Agalarov stated that, quote, when my father asks, I cannot say no to him, close quote, and that, quote, he is not the kind of guy you are going to get to ask questions, and I wouldn't. It doesn't matter. If I'm dying, I'm not going to ask him a question, close quote. Later, on June 3, 2016, after the phone call with Emin, Goldstone emailed to Donald Trump Jr. with the subject line, Russia, Clinton, private and confidential. The message. On June 3, 2016 at 10:36 a.m., Rob Goldstone wrote, good morning. Emin just called and asked me to contact you with something very interesting. The Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father, Aras, this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. This is obviously very high-level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump, helped along by Aras and Emin. What do you think is the best way to handle this information, and would you be able to speak to Emin about it directly? I can also send this info to your father via Rona, but it is ultra-sensitive, so wanted to send it to you first. Best, Rob Goldstone. End of message. Goldstone testified to the committee that his portrayal of the offer of derogatory information being part of, quote, Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump, close quote, was based on his general assessment of Russian enthusiasm for Trump. Goldstone told the committee that at the time he did not have any specific information to indicate that Veselnitskaya was connected to the Russian government. Regarding his description of the, quote, Crown Prosecutor of Russia, close quote, Goldstone clarified that, quote, federal prosecutors in England are called Crown Prosecutors, which is how I still refer to them. So when he told me that she was, quote, well connected, close quote, I made the assumption where she was connected to and that she was probably federal in terms of anything else. When I put Crown, I was using my English expression for a federal prosecutor. I was inferring that she was working for the government because when I pushed, I was told she's connected." Close quote. Goldstone further explained that he described the information as, quote, ultra-sensitive, close quote, because, quote, "if somebody tells me that somebody may have damaging information on a potential presidential candidate, I believe it's ultra-sensitive, no matter what it is," close quote. Minutes after Goldstone's email, Trump Jr. responded, suggesting that he speak with Emmett Agalarov directly and writing, quote, "if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer," close quote.